A Beautiful Mind by Sylvia Nasar. Picture this. It's a warm spring afternoon in 1959, and you're sitting in a locked room inside a psychiatric hospital. In the corner, there's a man slumped in an armchair. His powerful body has gone completely slack, eyes staring blankly at the floor. This is a mathematical genius, someone whose mind travels through strange seas of thought that most of us can't even imagine. But right now, he's utterly lost. His visitor, a Harvard professor, finally breaks the uncomfortable silence. He leans forward, his voice strained with emotion, almost pleading. "How could you," he begins, "how could you, a mathematician, someone devoted to reason and logical proof, how could you believe that extraterrestrials are sending you messages? How could you believe you're being recruited by aliens to save the world?" The man in the chair, John Nash, slowly looks up. His eyes are cool and eerily calm. And in a soft, reasonable Southern drawl, he says something so chilling and profound, it cuts straight to the heart of what makes us human. He says, "Because the ideas I had about supernatural beings came to me the same way that my mathematical ideas did, so I took them seriously." That single sentence unlocks one of the most incredible stories of the 20th century. It's the story of a mind so brilliant it could decode the hidden rules of the universe, yet so fractured it could shatter into a million pieces. Today, we're diving into Sylvia Nasar's masterpiece, A Beautiful Mind. This isn't just any biography. It's an epic journey through 3 acts: genius, madness, and reawakening. It's the book that inspired an Academy Award-winning film and revealed the secret life of a man whose ideas were quietly shaping our modern world, even as he wandered like a ghost. And I promise you, by the end of our time together, you won't just understand John Nash's story. You'll gain profound insight into the razor-thin line between brilliance and madness, the incredible resilience of the human spirit, and the quiet, unsung heroism of a love that refused to give up. This story shows us that a life isn't defined by its highest peaks or its darkest valleys, but by the entire, breathtaking, and often heartbreaking journey in between. Our story doesn't begin in the prestigious halls of Princeton, but in a small, bustling town called Bluefield, West Virginia, nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. This is where John Forbes Nash Jr. was born in 1928. He wasn't a child prodigy in the classic sense. He was a peculiar little boy, solitary and introverted. While other kids played hide-and-seek and had crabapple battles, little Johnny Nash stayed indoors, alone, playing with toy airplanes or buried in a book. His parents, John Sr. and Virginia, knew their son was different. They knew he was bright. John Sr. was an electrical engineer, a serious, conservative man who patiently answered his son's endless questions about science and technology. But it was his mother, Virginia, a former schoolteacher, who truly devoted herself to his education. She taught him to read by age 4 and filled their home with books and encyclopedias. At school, though, Johnny didn't shine. His teachers actually labeled him an underachiever. He daydreamed constantly, had trouble following rules, and his social awkwardness made him an easy target. The neighborhood kids called him Big Brains and teased him mercilessly about his strange experiments. He was an outsider, and he learned early to build a protective shell around himself, an armor of intellectual superiority. The first real spark of his mathematical genius came from a book. At around 14, he discovered E.T. Bell's Men of Mathematics. For the first time, he glimpsed a world of pure, beautiful ideas, a universe far removed from the dull arithmetic he learned in school. He became especially captivated by the story of Pierre de Fermat, and on his own, Johnny actually managed to prove one of Fermat's famous theorems. It was thrilling, a moment of discovering his own power, like a key turning in a lock, opening a door to a universe only he could see. But even then, he didn't dream of becoming a mathematician. That seemed as practical as becoming a concert pianist. So he followed in his father's footsteps and went to the Carnegie Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh to study chemical engineering. It didn't last long. He hated the labs, the rigid rules, the lack of deep thinking. He complained that chemistry wasn't about how well you could think, but how well you could handle a pipette. Meanwhile, he was absolutely dazzling his math professors. They saw his originality, his hunger for difficult problems. One of them even called him a young Gauss. They urged him to switch majors, to embrace his true calling. At Carnegie, the pattern of his childhood repeated itself. Intellectually, he was a star. Socially, he was an outcast. His peers found him weird and arrogant. He was unsophisticated, played the same chord on the piano over and over, and would actually pout if he lost a game of bridge. He was relentlessly teased, called horrible names. They sensed something was different about him, but they were also just kids, and as one of them later admitted with regret, "We tormented poor John. We were very unkind." He became desperately lonely. But it was in this pressure cooker of social rejection and intellectual triumph that Nash began forging the ideas that would change the world. In the fall of 1948, at just 20 years old, Nash arrived in Princeton, New Jersey. In those days, Princeton was, as one physicist declared, the mathematical center of the universe. It was a sanctuary, a hothouse where giants like Albert Einstein and John von Neumann walked the halls. The place was electric with ideas, and Nash, the awkward boy from Bluefield, had arrived in paradise. The head of the department, a gruff, brilliant mathematician named Solomon Lefschetz, gathered the new graduate students and told them bluntly that they were the best of the best, but compared to the real mathematicians at Princeton, they were ignorant, pathetic babies. Lefschetz's philosophy was simple: sink or swim. He valued originality and independent thinking above everything else. He didn't care about classes or grades. He cared about research. He told them, "Don't come to me with your pretty proofs. We don't bother with that baby stuff around here." This environment was absolutely perfect for John Nash. He hated absorbing knowledge from others. He wanted to rediscover everything for himself. He rarely attended classes or read books. Instead, he learned by talking to people, asking probing questions, and most importantly, by thinking. He spent his days pacing the hallways, riding a bicycle in smaller and smaller circles, or lying on a table in the library, whistling Bach, completely lost in his own world. He was obsessed with finding the biggest, hardest, most important problems. He even made an appointment to see Einstein, sketching out his own ideas for improving quantum physics. Einstein listened politely, and then, with a kind smile, gently told the young man, "You had better study some more physics." But it was in a new, slightly looked down upon field that Nash would make his mark. That field was game theory. Game theory was the brainchild of the brilliant John von Neumann. He realized that human interactions, from poker games to economic competition to nuclear war, could all be analyzed as strategic games. The key problem, especially when multiple people are involved, is that you get stuck in an endless loop of circular reasoning. I think that he thinks that I think that he thinks. Von Neumann had solved this problem for zero-sum games, where one person's win is another person's loss. But most of life isn't like that. Most of the time, there's potential for everyone to gain something. For these non-zero-sum games, von Neumann's theory was incomplete. He believed players would have to form coalitions and make explicit agreements to solve the game. Nash had a completely different intuition. He wasn't focused on the group. He was focused on the individual. In his slender, 27-page doctoral thesis, written when he was just 21 years old, Nash introduced an idea of breathtaking simplicity and power. It became known as the Nash equilibrium. Here's the idea. A game is solved. It reaches an equilibrium when every player is independently choosing their best possible strategy, given the strategies all the other players have chosen. At that point, no single player can improve their outcome by changing their strategy alone. It's a point of stability, a natural resting point. This insight cut through the endless "I think that you think" loop. It provided a way to predict outcomes in complex situations without assuming players would cooperate. It was a profound update to Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand. Nash showed how a system of independent, self-interested individuals could produce a coherent and predictable outcome. When he took his idea to the great von Neumann, the older man dismissed it curtly. "That's trivial," he said. "That's just a fixed-point theorem." It was a crushing rejection. But Nash, as always, trusted his own mind. He knew he'd found something important. In just a few short years at Princeton, Nash produced a storm of brilliant ideas. He invented a clever board game called Hex, which became a fad in the math department. He wrote a classic paper on the bargaining problem, showing how two rational people would split a pie. And he laid the foundation for modern game theory with his equilibrium concept. By his late 20s, he seemed to have it all. He was a rising star at MIT. His genius had won him recognition, respect, and even love. He'd married a beautiful, brilliant physics student named Alicia Lard who adored him, and they were expecting a child. It looked like a perfect life, a brilliant strategy perfectly executed. But underneath the brilliant surface, everything was chaos. He had a secret mistress, a nurse named Eleanor Steer, and an illegitimate son he barely acknowledged. He was involved in a series of intense, emotional, and secret relationships with other men. He was torn by deep ambivalence toward his wife, his university, and even his country. And underneath it all lurked a haunting fear of failure. He was turning 30, an age when many mathematicians feel their best years are behind them. The pressure was crushing. And then, the beautiful mind began to unravel. It started subtly. In the winter of 1959, he walked into the common room at MIT, holding a copy of the New York Times. He casually remarked to no one in particular that an article on the front page contained an encrypted message from inhabitants of another galaxy, and only he could decipher it. His colleagues thought he was joking, but he wasn't joking at all. He began seeing hidden meanings everywhere, in a red necktie, a license plate, a random number. He believed he was a messianic figure of secret but great importance. He wrote frantic letters to ambassadors, to the Pope, to the FBI, outlining vast conspiracies. He told people he was on the cover of Life magazine, disguised as the Pope. He declared himself the Emperor of Antarctica. The ideas about supernatural beings, he later explained, came to him in exactly the same way his mathematical ideas had. They felt like revelations, flashes of divine intuition. So naturally, he took them seriously. This was the onset of paranoid schizophrenia, one of the most catastrophic mental illnesses. It's not a flight from reason, but in some ways, an exacerbation of it. It's a world where everything has meaning, nothing is random, and the mind builds intricate, logical, but completely delusional systems. For the next 3 decades, John Nash was lost in this world, the lost years, as his biographer calls them. He fled to Europe, trying to renounce his American citizenship and become a quote, citizen of the world. He was arrested, deported, and institutionalized. He was subjected to brutal insulin coma therapy, a treatment he later described as, quote, torture, where doctors induce a coma by dangerously lowering a patient's blood sugar. He spent years cycling in and out of mental hospitals. When he wasn't hospitalized, he became a ghost. He returned to Princeton, the scene of his youthful triumphs. But now, he was a phantom. The Phantom of Fine Hall, the students called him. He was a sad, silent figure who haunted the campus, oddly dressed, muttering to himself, scribbling mysterious messages and numerological formulas on blackboards. His wife Alicia stood by him for a time. She endured the chaos, the fear, the public humiliation, but the strain eventually became too much. They divorced in 1963. Yet, in an act of incredible loyalty and compassion, she never truly abandoned him. After he was released from his final long-term hospitalization, with nowhere else to go, she took him in. He lived in her house in Princeton Junction, not as a husband, but as a boarder. She gave him a quiet place to exist, a sanctuary. While the man himself was a phantom, his name, the name Nash, was quietly taking over the world of economics. His ideas from that brief, brilliant period in his youth were being applied everywhere. You'd find Nash equilibrium in economics textbooks, Nash bargaining solution in political science papers, and his name attached to theorems in pure mathematics. A whole new generation of scholars who'd never met him, who assumed he was probably dead, were building their careers on his work. He was a legend, but the man was gone. And then, slowly, miraculously, the waking dream began to end. The change was almost imperceptible at first. It was a gradual tapering off, a slow reawakening over many years. In the late 1980s, Freeman Dyson, a famous physicist at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, saw Nash nearly every day. For years, Dyson would greet him, never expecting a response. Then, one morning, Dyson said his usual, "Good morning," and Nash spoke back. He spoke a clear, rational sentence about Dyson's daughter. Dyson was stunned. He later said, "What I found most wonderful was this slow awakening. Slowly, he just somehow woke up. Nobody else has ever awakened the way he did." He began doing mathematics again. He started talking to people in the common room, asking questions. He learned to use a computer and began corresponding by email with other mathematicians, who were amazed to discover that the sharpness, the originality, the toughness of his mind was still there. He was looking at things from a slightly different angle, just as he always had. He was, as one of his colleagues said, a walking miracle. This slow, quiet return to the world might have remained a secret within the small community of Princeton. But then came a moment that changed everything. It's a mild day in early October 1994. A mathematics seminar has just ended. Harold Kuhn, Nash's closest friend from their graduate school days, catches up with him at the door. They decide to sit on a bench outside, near a small Japanese fountain. Kuhn, his voice thick with emotion, gets straight to the point. He tells Nash to expect an important telephone call the next morning, around 6 o'clock. The call will be from Stockholm. Nash, who usually avoids eye contact, turns his head and fixes his gaze directly on his friend. Kuhn's voice breaks. "He's going to tell you, John," he says, "that you have won a Nobel Prize." And just like that, the phantom was gone. In his place stood John Forbes Nash Jr., Nobel Laureate. The world that had forgotten him, that had assumed he was either dead or lost forever, was about to learn the story of his beautiful, broken, and ultimately triumphant mind. What an incredible journey. When you step back from all the details of John Nash's life, you're left with a few profound and timeless lessons. Lessons that are just as relevant for you, as someone figuring out your own path, as they are for a world-renowned genius. First, there's the haunting question of genius and madness. Nash's own chilling words, that his delusional ideas came to him in exactly the same way as his mathematical ones, suggest the line between them is terrifyingly thin. It makes you wonder if that kind of radical, unconventional thinking, the ability to see the world in a way no one else can, comes at a price. Nash's mind was a tool of immense power, but it was also incredibly fragile. The same qualities that allowed him to break through the toughest mathematical problems, his intense focus, his distrust of conventional wisdom, his ability to live almost entirely inside his own head, may have also made him vulnerable. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths can sometimes be deeply connected to our greatest vulnerabilities. The second lesson is about the true nature of success. We often think of success as a straight line, an upward climb from one achievement to the next. Nash's life shows us that's a complete illusion. He had this brilliant, meteoric rise, followed by a fall into darkness that lasted 30 years. 30 years. Most people would have been written off completely. But his story didn't end there. His reawakening shows that life isn't about reaching a peak and staying there. It's about resilience. It's about the capacity to endure the lost years and still find your way back. his most profound victory wasn't winning the Nobel Prize. It was the quiet, day-by-day struggle to reclaim his own mind. And that leads to the third and perhaps most important lesson. For all of Nash's focus on logic, rationality, and individual self-interest, his story is ultimately a testament to the power of human connection. He was a man who tried to turn life into a mathematical calculation, to strip it of emotion, but in the end, it was emotion, love, loyalty, compassion that saved him. It was Alicia who, even after their divorce, gave him a home and treated him with dignity, when the rest of the world saw only a madman. It was his friends and colleagues at Princeton who created a quiet, supportive sanctuary for him, a place where the phantom could exist without fear or judgment. They didn't cure him, but they gave him the one thing he needed most: a community that accepted him. His life is ultimate proof that no mind, no matter how brilliant, can survive on its own. We need each other. So, what can you take from this today? First, find your own Princeton. Find a place, and more importantly, a group of people who value you for who you are, who challenge your thinking, but who will also be there to catch you if you fall. A supportive community is the anchor that allows you to take intellectual and creative risks. Second, don't be afraid of the crooked path. Your life won't be a straight line. There will be detours, setbacks, maybe even periods where you feel completely lost. Nash's story teaches us that these lost years don't have to be the end of the story. They can be a quiet period before a new beginning. Be patient with yourself. And finally, never underestimate the power of simple human kindness. The grand gestures are rare, but the small acts of loyalty, patience, and compassion are what truly sustain us. Alicia's decision to let John live in her house as a boarder wasn't a dramatic, headline-grabbing event. It was a quiet act of grace that, over many years, made his recovery possible. That was a summary of A Beautiful Mind by Sylvia Nasar. We've journeyed through the incredible highs and devastating lows of John Nash's life today, but a summary is really just a map. The real treasure is found when you explore the territory for yourself. This book is filled with so much detail, so much humanity, that you can't help but be moved by it. It's a story that stays with you long after you've finished. If any part of this incredible story of genius, madness, and redemption has touched you, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning the facts of a great mathematician's life. It's an experience that will make you think deeply about the nature of the human mind and the incredible power of the human heart. There's a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It tells us we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next deep dive into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep exploring these powerful ideas together.